Welcome to Broadcast Interrupted. We are back. It's been a while, but here we are. I'm Chirag, and with me is
Andy.
Hi, Andy. And who did we interrupt on this week's episode, Andy?
On this week's episode, we interrupted Libny Pacheco. Libny is a architect, trained architect. He works at White Architecture in Sweden, at the Uppsala branch of White Architecture. And he works as a computational designer, basically. He's part of the computational team of the firm. And how do I know him? I met him about 5-6 years ago in Beijing when I worked for Cross Boundaries Architects. And he was the project architect there that I worked with on quite a few projects that I was a part of. And since then, we developed a working rapport that went beyond just the things that we worked on at work. And we found a lot of common interests in terms of history, theory, just culture, finance, economics. This guy is quite broad. And I've just kept in touch. And at some point, Chirag mentioned that we must talk to him. So, Chirag, what did you think?
Like you just mentioned, that this guy has a very broad range of perspectives on very different topics. That was that was what made me so curious about him.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted that we get him on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I have always wondered what it would be to be an architect who has worked across continents, across countries, in different markets and in different spaces at different scales to produce the kind of work that we call architecture today.
Yeah,
Contemporary architecture today.
Sure.
And I thought that it would be really important if we, because you mentioned that he was with you in China, and then when we had him on the podcast, he spoke about how he's worked in London, China, now Sweden. So he's been all over the place.
And
he's South American. Yeah, of course. And he's South American, and he's a Venezuelan. And I thought that it would be great to just see what are the perspectives that he has to share with us. And I think the conversation, which was really long, as always, the conversation brought out just how sophisticated he is when it comes to his designing, the way he designs. Because on one hand, we did speak to him a lot about the things that he writes. By the way, he has a blog on Medium. We've put the link in the description for you to go and read it.
Yeah.
That was also the primary topic of our discussion. But on one hand, where he talks about design theory, philosophy, and history, on the other end, he is also so serious and up to date about softwares, about how BIM modeling works
all
today,
the
about
platforms,
all the other platforms that are out there, whether it be rendering, whether it be the way drawings are produced, whether it be the way, just how architecture and design is produced in today's time. I think he has a very sophisticated outlook towards that. And I think
and quite
it was
holistic, yeah.
And quite holistic. And I feel it just was very refreshing to see someone for whom the sort of binary of theoretical practice and so-called commercial practice of architecture kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
Or has collapsed after all these years and all the experience that he's had. So guys, here is the conversation with Libny Pacheco. It will be released in 2 parts as all our other episodes. Please have a look. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel, We hope to bring you more such episodes coming soon. And most importantly, let us know what you think. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Libny.
Hi, Libny.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good.
So, how are you doing? All good?
Yeah, it's sort of overcast, but it's quite light. Like the light is coming back. So
that's a thing to look towards, something to look forward
yes,
to.
some vitamin D.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pulling you out
we-
of the winter slumber.
Yeah.
Yeah, now the sunlight is the sun is going out at 7 in the afternoon.
Okay.
Ah,
So you get a
So
little
Yeah,
longer
in-
day.
in Sweden, I guess it's pretty extreme in terms of day and night.
Yeah. Since Andy has already revealed that you are in Sweden, the big reveal has happened. So I think the first question is, how did you get to Sweden? And where all have you been before you reached Sweden?
yeah, it's very funny because my colleagues were all like puzzled, like because we are 3 Venezuelans working here in the same office.
Okay.
We
Mhm.
studied together university back in Venezuela, but we
Ah.
also happened, the 3 of us, we happen to be very close friends
Ah,
since uni, and they were all confused. It's like, wait, so you're friends? Yes. And you study together? Yes. And you come from Venezuela? Yes. And you're here in Uppsala? Yes.
And
they
in
were
the
like,
same office, in the same
and the
branch
same
and
office.
everything.
They were like, what's going on? Like, do you have some sort of dodgy deal or what's going on? But no, so that's the thing. One of these friends came here 15 years ago, right
Okay.
after we finished school.
Mhm.
And then she's been living here. She's been working as an architect for since then.
Mhm.
And then we there were some openings here in the office in Uppsala.
Mhm.
So first, the other friend, his name is Axel. He was working actually in Germany, in Mannheim,
Oh,
and then he wanted some sort of change, and then he got hired. And then at the same time, I was trying to get him to work with us in Beijing.
Ah,
And he got interview and everything because he knows German, and then the partner in the office in Beijing was also German, and
right.
they were super happy.
Yeah.
And then he said, "No, I am staying in Uppsala," so he stayed in Uppsala. And then a year later, I also joined them because there was an opening also here,
Mhm.
and I wanted to move out of China, and then that's it. Having said that. So I'm working now in Uppsala in a branch of white architecture
Mhm.
Okay.
or architecture.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's an office that was funded in the 70s.
Oh, all right.
It works as a cooperative, so there is no bosses, no owners.
Uh-huh.
The employees own the company. You have to work 80% of your time to be able to buy shares.
Ah.
To
Oh,
be
all right.
part of the company,
Mhm.
Okay.
and then everything is run. It's quite horizontal, and then there is 11 different branches.
Mhm.
Most here in Sweden. There is one in London. There is one in Oslo, and now there is one in Frankfurt. But it just opened, so there is like 2 or 3
Cool.
people
Yeah.
because we won a couple of projects there.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, all right.
And then every office is sort of independent, but
Mhm.
we share central services. Like, for example, the computational team is still central.
Mm.
Okay. And
Or
that one is based in Sweden. I mean, it is
Uh,
central, but it is still based somewhere, or?
yeah, so the office, the company was funded in Gothenburg, but now the headquarters are in Stockholm. So,
Okay.
for example, the most of the computational team is in Stockholm, but there is still other guys in some of the bigger offices.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
And and then the visualization team is also centralized.
Okay.
Cool.
So I'm working in in our branch has 70 people, and it's made out of like a third is a landscape team, and then the other third is well, half of the office is architects, and then the other one is more project management and urban planners,
Right.
All
the
right.
administration.
So they always try
And-
to keep it pretty mixed up, huh?
So ours, Uppsala was actually acquired by Gothenburg some time ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it used to be a landscape office.
Oh.
All right.
But with time, because our, White is mostly an architecture company,
Mm-hmm.
so it has transformed more into an architecture
Okay.
office. Though the landscape team does most of the cool projects, like nice, like in terms of like in national reach, they work mostly in the capital, not even here in Uppsala.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
I also think largely it's a very interesting structure.
Yeah.
The way it is set up with you saying 80% of your time, then you get some shares in the company. And so it's a very horizontal kind of hierarchical system there. So I think it's a very interesting structure that you get to see right here. Yeah. But before you reached this office, you were in China, and I believe before that also in London. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
entire...
How did you jump from let's say you studied in Caracas, right?
In Venezuela, I
Yes.
study in Merida. It's
Merida.
like
Merida.
at the end of the Andes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And then from there,
What happened? How did
Yeah.
you?
So I studied there. It was a 5-year degree,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and then the way it works is every semester. So the design studio is per semester, and then every studio it starts with like a pavilion, and then your last one is an urban planning project. So the idea is that we cover from the almost like interior to urban design. So it's a very broad
Spectrum
5-year
of skills.
program.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing is that I did my internship in London
All right.
with this small office called Plasma Studio,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
and they were connected to the partners in that office were teaching at the Architectural Association.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of my plan of trying to get that internship. So by then I was trying to get actually two. Like my options were then or Office DEA with Monica Ponce de Leon and
Yeah.
Veterani. It was exactly the same strategy, like because they were teaching at Harvard back then.
Mm-hmm.
But Monica also studied in Venezuela from
okay.
Office DEA, and Eva Castro from Plasma Studio also studied in Venezuela. So there was sort of this connection. And back then, like GSD and the AA were doing the cool stuff. So
Right,
I kind of
yeah.
wanted to be where the cool stuff was.
Wait, which year is
Yeah,
this again?
exactly.
The internship year? Which year is this?
This is 2005.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's the time when you were very interested in the GST and
I think Super Critical happened like a couple of years before you went to London, right? At the AA?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. So I'm mentioning this because then I made the link with Plasma Studio, did the internship there, learned tons, went back to uni, finished, and then I got again back to London to work for them in 2008, 2009. So it was exactly the middle of the credit crunch, the economic crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great timing.
Yeah. So I have to leave. They were firing everybody. Like Zaha was firing 200 people. Foster was firing 200 people. And then, so I went back to Venezuela. The crisis started in Venezuela. The economic crisis. It was really bad to find a work as an architect, because either you work for the government and you had to be corrupt and pay like under the table some money to get jobs or whatever, or lie in the contracts that you would like how much material that you have to lie. Or you would work for private developers which had these construction systems, like the same construction system, and they will build 100 buildings exactly one after the other because it's the same construction system. And then architects were hired just to, I don't know, change the color of the paint in the facade, just because we could sign the projects off.
Right.
Okay.
So those were the two options. So I ended up working in a recording studio.
Cool.
And in a tabloid, in a newspaper.
Oh, okay.
I learned quite a lot of InDesign in the newspaper.
Nice.
But then, there was no way. Like, I didn't earn enough money to pay for my rent even.
Yeah.
So that's when I contacted again the guys from Plasma Studio. This was 2011.
Yeah.
And by then they had moved to China, to Beijing. And then I say, hey guys, do you have any chance of work there? And then, so I sent this email, and then 2 weeks later, I was in Beijing.
Oh
wow, cool.
It was like pretty crazy. So then I ended up.
Did you save the last InDesign file? Control S?
It was there.
Sorry, it was awesome. It was all. I hated it at the beginning because it was all these templates. Because it's this newspaper, everything is like templates. There's the style, titles, everything is a template, and everything is like a grid. And I used to hate it. It's like, this is like horrible. Like, where's my freedom as a designer?
Artistic freedom.
Yeah, but then you realize that sometimes we wasted so much time trying to redo everything from scratch. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's like, it's rather easier to use some sort of template, and then within the template you can go a step further in your design because you have solved already much of this little thing.
But I also think it's sorry, you can continue. I just
no. Tell me.
No, I was just thinking, like, I think at every office that you work at the early part of your career, somehow one kind of software takes a prominence that you are just constantly using that till you start like collecting these software. When you spoke about this InDesign being the primary software, I remember doing my internship when I was in Mumbai, and the first time the first internship I just learned Illustrator, and then the next one I just learned Rhino, then the next one I just you kind of keep collecting it as you go. At every office there is a different a software takes a different prominence of sorts, and then you kind of move forward. But I mean, you were saying.
So we reached Beijing.
Yeah.
We are in Beijing. Yes. So I actually started teaching first. Like the invitation was to join them in an experimental master course at Tsinghua University.
Okay.
So I was in charge of the theory part of the master course. So we had like theory, then we had some sort of like programming, Grasshopper, and then there was the actual design studio. So we covered these three. It was last year students that we got. And this program ran for 3 or 4 semesters.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
And it was kind of fun. So that's what I was doing first.
And this was also led by Eva Castro, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is Eva. So she was, as I said, she was teaching in the AA. She was the head of the landscape urbanism unit, master unit. And then she moved to Beijing, and she was still being the head of the unit in the AA.
Right.
But in parallel, she was leading this new unit in Tsinghua. Same sort of idea, like landscape urbanism methodology. And then so I taught there, and then like after a year maybe,
Yeah.
I started also working for the studio as such, like the architecture studio, the plasma
Okay.
studio.
Mm.
And and then I continued working for them just as an architect in plasma.
Before working with
And then we
Andy.
met at Cross Boundaries at some point.
Yeah.
Yes, and then I moved to Cross Boundaries.
No, that's nice. And what do you think you like as an architect now? What do you think? How do you think you engage with society or like people outside of architecture through your architecture? How do you think? What do you feel you do as an architect? To put it,
Yeah, especially with going across so many sort of cultural differences and how you've learned to read the world or culture in general. How do you see your role, I guess?
Mm. Mm. So like for London, it was always about like being avant-garde and being sort of
Radical.
like as extreme as you can, and that's sort of your design pitch.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was very international. We were doing competitions in Germany, in Italy, and like not that many in the UK actually. So
Yeah.
you are, in that sense, when you're an office, like a London office, you are playing more internationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what you use is your own style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not that much interest in connecting to the locals, because
Right.
the idea is that you're bringing something that is different, and that's sometimes what they want, these exceptional pieces of architecture.
Right.
Yeah.
So like you see the early work of Plasma Studio is quite defined, triangulated, sort of folded architecture.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I feel like there was not that much of an interest to create a connection, like a cultural, social connection. That was sort of the business. We have this style. Do you like it? Do you don't like it?
Okay.
In China, we sort of continued the same when we were still Plasma Studio, because we were playing as the international design studio.
Right.
And
Yeah.
many of the cities wanted this sort of iconic architecture. The architecture does respond to the site, because we are doing all this like mapping and analyzing of spatial conditions.
Right.
But it doesn't play that much at the cultural level. Like the cultural references are not that important. It's more like material that is on the site, which makes it specific to that site, but it's not really sort of trying to play culturally. Then in Cross Boundaries, I think we get to play more with these cultural references. We will try to find these sort of icons and like local cultural references. Like sometime we were like looking at I don't know, this bird that was common from this side, and that became part of the inspiration for the shape.
Right.
And then here in Sweden, so I'm working in Uppsala. It's the fourth biggest city, but this is still 200,000 people.
Okay.
So it's very small town. It's very conservative in terms of architecture. The discussion is very open. So when the government is gonna build something, first they have to show the proposal in the media, in the newspapers, and then it starts like a public discussion. Like people send letters to the newspaper and Facebook and blah blah blah, and it's very heated discussion. We just did one project to locate the art museum inside the castle. There is a castle here, and it was like uproar in the city. Like people were like,
wow.
"These architects," and the project just like it was just a feasibility study, and we had to do some sort of renderings to show the idea. it wasn't a project. It was just the possibility of having it there. Like, does it work? Does it not work? Feasibility study. And then the project got canceled because citizens put too much pressure on the discussion. And then the politician said, okay, sorry, this project is not going. And the same happens in Stockholm. I've been involved also in big interventions, and then public is very present. For example, David Chipperfield designed and won the competition for the design of the Nobel Museum in Stockholm. He won it, blah blah blah, international, blah 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 announcement, and then the citizens of Stockholm started complaining. It got cancelled. And now it's going to happen in a different place of the city because citizens complained that it would destroy the city skyline or whatever. So in that sense, here, sorry, where I was trying to say is that the citizens are very involved in what a building will be.
Okay.
So even if we propose any kind of building, citizens will have sort of the last word, so to say, especially if those are public projects.
And they have like ways of organizing themselves about making themselves heard, or?
It's all in the media.
Okay.
Like I was doing the introduction course, the Swedish course that the government offers, and there is a whole section, like 2 weeks, of how you can express publicly.
Oh wow!
And then they teach you what are the mediums and how you address and how you should like do it. Is it the newspaper? Is it in the blogs? Is it in blah blah blah? So it's quite structured, the way you express your opinions here.
But then I think what is also very the question that I then want to ask is, when you guys are designing or collaborating towards putting up, say for example, something like that art museum inside the castle, within discussion, how much does this the question of the citizenry kind of come out
during the design process?
Does it have its sort of impact in the design process as well? Like, are you guys talking about it, or?
Yeah, here is a very tricky ground, because if you try to use this sort of cultural references, like the building looks like a bird or a
mountain.
They are very skeptical about it. It's like, no, come on, it's sort of like, it's too cheap. Like, don't come
Kitsch.
to me with it's like, don't sell me that is not enough. So what happens is projects here go really fast into costs. The specifics, like how much is going to cost us as a city to do this. So you have to run numbers quite quickly. So it's very pragmatic. And so there is no much interest either on creating fancy looking things. I'm talking about the Uppsala market. Stockholm is a bit different, because in Stockholm then you have OMA doing these really cool towers, and you have 3XN. So there is a lot of stuff happening, because it is a much bigger city. It's like 2 million people there. So there is more flexibility, I think, in that sense in Stockholm, for example.
Okay. I mean, like when we talk about these buildings which say look like a bird, or these kind of ideas of how they start, actually these things also become within the language of architects, these kind of stories, right? Like, this architect designed this building thinking about these things, and then the next one comes and says, but I designed it thinking about it in this other aspect. There's like a play of sort of references and cultures, and also not just to the culture outside, but also within architecture itself. There is this idea of the discipline, as they call it. So what do you think? I mean, and when we will be linking this in the description, that is the article that you wrote on your blog. And you mentioned this idea of heroes, and we both just loved it because we were like this.
Yeah. I love the idea that someone still wants to really sincerely say that, yes, I have heroes in architecture and I love something about it. And here it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's great.
But then, who are your heroes? Let's start with that.
I think we're going into deeper territory now because it's slightly emotional, but yes, we want to talk about architecture, of course.
Yeah.
The heroes.
Yes.
Okay. I will explain later, but I would say Peter Eisenmann,
Mhm.
Okay.
Rem Koolhaas,
Mm-hmm.
then probably it's gonna be, I don't know, FOA, Alejandro Saera and Farshid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then UN Studio, Beba Berkel and Caroline. Then I was a big fan of this Venezuelan architect. His name is Dirk Bornhorst. I think he was from Germany.
Okay.
He has this crazy helicode building. Like you can find it on the internet. It's like a mall that it was on top of a hill.
Okay.
It's like a mountain. It's like it's like modern architecture.
Okay.
All right.
But he had these super nice family houses too, like super organic, sort of like laid Frank Lloyd Wright, but in the tropics.
Yeah, but a little bit like Brasilia.
Yeah, kind of going into that direction, but the houses geometrically were much more like richer. It was almost like sails and fractals kind of thing. Really, really cool. I was like quite a fan. Jean Nouvel was quite an influence. And then like Paul Virilio, and
Claude Perron.
Yes, and then the guys from Plasma, which I consider more like friends than than anything else. And then I also had like a MVRDV period as well. They were cool.
Yeah. But I think also, I mean, it's interesting that you set up this kind of very broad range of, because all of them perceivably have very many different styles or the way in which they practice their architecture. Do you also notice a sense of conversation that is constantly going on between them? Like, what is this, and what do you think is the nature of this conversation?
So like now I said put more names, no? Well, there are like a couple of Japanese, Toyo Ito and Kazuyo, blah blah blah. I think what happened is that in uni we had like a really nice collection of magazines. Like we had all of them, GA, JA, the Japanese one. We had Architectural
Digest or no?
Is it is it Architectural Design, the AD, the one from London?
The one that does biographies.
Like all about like digital stuff. And then we had El Croquis magazine and all the Spanish ones like Quaderns, and then we have Domus.
Right.
But around 2000, all these people were connected, and I think in part was because of these any conferences. Which ran for 10 years. I think it was Peter Eisenmann's wife is Cynthia Davidson.
Right.
Yeah.
Like they organized this one
Any
each
magazine,
year.
Yeah.
And there was like anyhow, anywhere, any.
Yeah.
And then it was 10 years, and they brought all these people together. The Japanese, the Spanish, everyone was there.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get that sense of connections between all these people. So all are connected. MVRDV worked for OMA, but then OMA is REM. REM study with Peter Eisenmann in New York in this design
Urban
institute
Design
or something.
Institute, yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much like, and then Ben also worked for OMA at some point. Farshid and Alejandro studied in Harvard. So it was all connected. I think at the beginning, even like Philip Johnson was still alive, and he was still sort of saying who was who in architecture.
Yeah.
So it was a time where it was easy to follow this sort of networks of architects, because it was quite filtered. Like even magazines were quite filtered. So
very curated.
Yeah, exactly. Then it comes the explosion of all these blogs and web scenes, and it was harder to track who's who. But you're right. There were some clear connections between all these guys. So there's like threads. It sounds like their production is sort of different, but yeah, you could create links between these people.
Between all of them.
Yeah, and I think also in your article you mention these links are also not just I would say very colloquial in a way that, you know, this person studied there or things like that. It also started after a point reflecting in practice, at least in the decade of the 90s, when you see starting with the Max Reinhardt house by Peter Eisenmann, then going into the Mobius house by Ben van Berkel, and then the big culmination in the early 2000s with Rem Koolhaas' CCTV tower. And you talk about it in your article. I think this is a good point maybe to get into that discussion as to how do you see these three in this chronological sphere kind of link up. What do you think about these three? What is the connection, or how do you read it?
Yeah, so we said Eisenmann,
Ben van Berkel and Koolhaas.
Yes, okay. So yeah, one thing is this is sort of like academic architecture,
right?
Yeah.
As in all of these offices, all of them are real studios doing real projects, but actually all these projects are funded by these guys teaching. So pretty much they pay for their offices because it's just too experimental to make it work as a proper office. So with that, what I'm saying is like it's very sort of avant-garde, academic kind of work. And that already sets sort of the connection between them. So if we start with Peter Eisenmann, so we put him in the sort of deconstruction era.
Yeah.
And then that we have to link it to what was going on. In architecture, we call it deconstruction, but in the world of philosophy, you call it poststructuralism.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this Derrida is part of this school of
larger group
of poststructuralism, which will include Deleuze, Foucault, and all these guys, sort of the 68.
Also Virilio and
Virilio is there. So all these 68 guys are the post-structuralists. May 68
in Paris.
Yeah.
Yes.
Please look it up.
So I guess like if we take just like a step back to why this is post-structuralist. So the reason is there is structuralist in the 50s and 60s, which is more related to language. You have Saussure, and then these people talking about trying to explain language, but in terms of opposites, like I don't know, categories like male, female, black, white, and it's always like opposites. It's this binary way of understanding the world. So this was 50s and 60s. It's kind of useful as a system, but then after the 60s, then the structuralists, these are philosophers, come and say, no, that's too limited. Reality is not like that. It's not black and white. Reality is a whole range from white to black and everything in between. And And this is what Peter Eisenmann then is trying to do when he says architecture is.
He begins with Chomsky, who's a grammatologist and a structuralist. He begins with Chomsky's understanding, but he doesn't do it the way it was done in Europe, because Chirag in his master's also studied this in extreme detail about this binary that you just mentioned about the West and the East, and the Dutch structuralists, Herman Hertzberger and these people were going into let's say social and cultural milieux outside Europe with the idea of this binary, bringing in something else from the outside that is well done, well matured, and that it would not have sort of social consequences of what Europe's been trying to do before the war.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I just wanted to add, because Eisenmann also begins with that, but he begins in a like he's led into the post-structuralism in a slightly different way, right?
Yeah, of course. He started with the is it the five?
The houses?
No, with the group with Michael Gray.
The New York Five.
Yeah. The New York Five, yes.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, he comes from like a long way back.
Yeah.
But yeah, when he started doing these houses and this stuff, is we're talking 80s,
70s, 80s,
yeah. So then we're talking about then post-structuralism. The particular case, Peter Eisenmann is speaking on Derrida. He works with Derrida even in a project in France for one of these competitions.
Parc de la Villette.
Yeah. But then the idea is this, no? Like architecture is not like one thing. It's not this binary inside outside.
Yeah.
Let's try to explore everything in between.
Yeah.
And this idea, Derrida was saying like, a text doesn't mean one thing. Whoever reads it will read it in a completely different way, because everybody has a particular and specific background. And this background makes you read things in a different way. So a text it never means the same for everybody. So there are these multiple meanings that can be embedded into something. And then Peter Eisenmann is trying to do that with architecture. Like, is it possible to explore, sort of explode and reveal all these different readings of a project? And that's the game of separating structure with walls and floors, and everything is sort of even in different positions where it should be. But it's this idea of forcing you.
I think it was also within this a sort of critique of the structuralist age of or the era of the buildings that they did. That is when like you said, like Derrida's saying that there is a different way because of the background with which a person comes from. So it's not so easy to export a diagram from place A and place it in place B and for it to mean the same thing, right? Like, and I think that is where Eisenmann really shows it through his architecture, because the structuralists, there are quite a few projects where they seemingly go into the vernacular and these old Moroccan architecture and sort of these villages, and then they just bring these kind of configurations and forms and then try to abstract them further and see how. I feel it was important to sort of destabilize a way of looking at the structure of the design itself, like how Aldo van Eyck describes this. He says, so yeah, we've been seeing the apse and the nave, the cross being there in all the churches since forever, but when I go to the Moroccan side of the world, I see a lot of these different configurational diagrams that lie underneath, which we must bring there and then see how it is done. And then I think Peter Eisenmann comes and says, no, wait, we need to do a lot more with what we were doing, right? I mean, that's, I think, somewhere where even you were... maybe you go along and
No, it's this is the time where for example, Michael Graves which was one of these five
New
of
York
New York,
Five.
is putting swans in the top of buildings and drawing waves in the facades.
Yeah.
So it's this completely like it's iconic architecture, but it's very almost banal, and it's like it's this crisis of architecture. And I guess the deconstructivists, architects are trying to find ways to get out of this horrible stage where we are like trying to use cultural references, but it's not. It's just the shed of the Las Vegas thing. It's just like a facade. You're not really digesting anything. It's just like a sort of flat image that you're pasting on buildings.
And they always called it production of new meanings,
Which
which they were trying to attempt. Let's say it was always. You remember? I think we once had a conversation about the floating column in an Eisenmann building. That it floats. One of the most important things, anything to be called a column, is that it at least has to touch the ground. If it doesn't touch the ground, how can you call it a column? But the way he places it in the space, which cannot be traced back to any orthographic sort of way of drawing a plan or way of drawing a section that produces this visual effect or this aesthetic effect. You cannot trace it back to anything. Like this is, but at the same time, once it's there, you first call it a column, and then you have to add floating column, because no matter what happens, with the way it sits with the objects in the space around it, you can't help but call it a column. Forcing this confusion, I guess.
Like Eisenmann used to say that he wanted people to feel uncomfortable in his
I don't know why
designs.
he said it that way, but
but it's just a way of he didn't want people to just pass by his buildings. Like architecture shouldn't be this space that you just move through. Like it should produce something in you. No, it's good. Like, I mean, the houses in Eisenmann were really important because he started understanding this idea of working, this exploding, this deconstructing meant a process. He had to create all these different tools to come up with how to control all of these things that he was doing, all these grids, and it became like a procedural architecture at some point. And then you start seeing when he, for example, starts bringing external information into the project, because the houses are quite contained, it's architectural elements only. But of course, there is meanings that come from the outside. So he has this university with a biotech building. In that one, for the first time, he brings like DNA references.
This is in Frankfurt.
Quite iconic, but it was like the DNA. And he keeps exploring these ones. I think the coolest one is this church of 2000. It was a competition. It's for the Vatican or something.
Okay.
The Church of 2000, I think it's called. In that one, he was using the process of crystallization of a particular liquid, like how it goes from liquid to crystals. And then he had like sort of screenshots of the different stages of going from liquid to crystal. And then from that process, from those diagrams, the shape of the building appears. And I'm mentioning this idea of the procedure because this is the base for this diagrammatic architecture that later people like Bemba Berkel is going to use. Because what they are interested is in this thing that moves through time, like this process. Like you are not playing anymore with static elements, but you are seeing architecture as something that has a movement that is used through time.
Okay. Are you saying also that the three projects we mentioned, let's say
Max
if we go
Reinhardt.
chronologically, the Max Reinhardt, then the Mobius, and then the CCTV. Do you think the procedural within the diagram also sort of develops into across, of course, scale, because they're all three completely different scales from each other, but as a procedural method of thinking, or what Eisenmann, I think, called the rational method. Do you think this is common between the three projects? Because the base, let's say, icon or symbol that is used for all three is, the Mobius strip, at least for its geometrical rationality.
Uh-huh.
But then the procedures are all extremely different. How do you see that formally?
Yeah. So in this sense, I would say, so the Mobius house is a sibling, is a like version 2 of what Eisenmann was doing. So it comes from the same lineage, so to say, which is procedures or diagrams that are trying to read time or trying to read a process. Either a process that is external to the project, like context or something, or another kind of reference, like this liquid that is becoming crystals, or in the case of the Mobius house, is the schedule of the family, like what they do, the routine they have during 24 hours. It's not walls, columns. We are talking about something else that is informing the building, like how it's going to look at the end. And it also reflects in the tower of Peter Eisenmann as well, like this idea of an external process that informs the building. It's playing quite a bit with the idea of time. But Koolhaas is going in a sort of different direction. It's also diagrammatic. It's playing also with information in this case, or data. So Eisenmann and the Mobius house is about data. They take data from the context and try to inform the building with this data. In this case, this data is about a process, something that happens in time. But in the case of Koolhaas, he's always playing with data, but in a more it's always about the program. It's programmatic data uses, and it's always about rearranging these different uses and creating these novel conditions. Like what happens if we?
I think you described it as adjacencies and sort of a different kind of logic.
Yeah, like the CCTV tower, it's very pragmatic in terms of program. Like, is instead of 2 towers, what happens if we link it and then we create a loop, so it's more efficient. And all the rearrangement of the program is quite intentional. And most of OMA architecture is all about that. It's always playing around with the program, like where do I put the toilet, where do I put the entrance, and it becomes a tool to create a critical building, because the way it works is kind of different from any other thing that you think. But in that sense, they also arrange the program, and at the same time, they are also thinking about the circulation, like how people move through this program. So you see, OMA analysis are always about this, how people move through the building, but also how we place the program around that movement. So it becomes like a two thing. For me, it sounds kind of similar, like what Eisenmann and US Studio and OMA is doing, but it's not, because OMA tends to focus on the program as such, the activities of the building. There is movement and etc. But these other guys are more into not much about program itself, but either conditions that come from the outside or
like formal manifestation of any kind of data that
like any other kind of like diagram or data that you can bring in.
I mean, it does take me back to Supercritical, where literally what you explained right now is kind of of course, they're kind of celebrity guys in that room that day. But I think I remember Eisenmann saying the same thing about Kulas, but at the same time saying, if you're so concerned about program, then why does the building look so radical? Like,
Yeah.
of course you want form. What I'm trying to ask you here is that what you mean here by pairing Eisenmann and I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I will ask you. This is a question. By pairing Eisenmann and Ben van Berkel together, but OMA doing it differently is that OMA wants to foreground something else as its practice, whereas these two will expose. Also, this is something you touch upon towards the end of your article, where you're saying, show how you do it, show what is involved, show everything, make it open, make the procedure worthy of analysis for the community of architects and outside. And what OMA does, I'm not saying they hide it, but what they foreground, they don't hide what the form is or how the form, let's say, is sort of brought out, because they also have like little, which BIG does in a very different way these days. But they had this tradition of making little diagrams of showing how this form can be understood out of primitives, out of geometric primitives, or something on those lines. But they always focused on foregrounding this aspect of their practice. You know, the iconic Seattle Library section with all those colors there, showing the reading area is this big volumetrically and in this odd looking color, because the importance of this program adjacent to the one next to it works this way. And, you know, that was really radical for them at that time.
Yeah.
Why do you think they do that? Why do you think they foreground something else instead of the sort of formal manifestation and a direct link between the formal manifestation?
Yeah. Rem Koolhaas is very cheeky. Like, he's a very intelligent person, and he has said it publicly. Like, he doesn't want to reveal his references. He doesn't want to talk. He never talks about what he reads.
Yeah.
Right.
And the reason is because, I mean, he's very leftish, but he doesn't want to be portrayed like that in the media. He doesn't want his architecture to be linked directly to a political preference.
Right.
But when I was talking about like OMA rearranges the program in strange ways, the strange ways are not strange. The strange ways they do are always anti sort of capitalist, very leftish. Like when you see the Prada boutique in New York.
Yeah.
Zoho has no public space. And then suddenly he puts a square inside of a boutique.
Yeah.
And this boutique crosses an entire block. So anybody can come inside and just like use the space of the boutique.
And it's a highly aestheticized space.
Yeah, but OMA is always doing these Troy horses.
Yeah.
Always. So in this case, they put public space inside of a Prada store, or the CCTV tower, which is a later they said the CCTV tower is actually a democratic building, because as a shape, like, it's so weird that when you see it from different angles, you see a different shape. Sometimes it looks just like an L. If you look at it from another angle, then it looks like a sort of O
frame.
It always changes. So then he says that means that the government cannot use a single image to say this is the CCTV tower. So they sabotaged the whole project of the CCTV tower. The government is asking them to produce an icon that they can show to the world, like how fantastic we are in China as a government and have this fantastic building. But then the building has no one image, has multiple images. this he said it, Rem said it. So it becomes a democratic kind of icon, and it cannot be used by a government as an image of their power. So OMA is always doing this sort of double agenda of, we give the client an amazing functioning, I don't know, blah, blah, blah building. They buy into it. It's awesome, looks awesome. But then there is this whole agenda of creating this counter kind of a space that is very political. But you're right. Rem doesn't reveal his sort of true intentions or his political agenda. And that's tricky. Like, if you don't understand that, then you miss like a big important part of his work. But these other guys, the Ben Van Berkel, the Peter Eisenmann, the Farshid Mosavi, FOA, Greg Lin, Reiseru Memoto, they are all part of the same team. And these are interested in what they call the autonomy of architecture, which is a bit of a strange word, but in theory, in summary, it's basically saying we want to reveal what architecture is. Like, we want to show everything what architecture is about. Like, how is it done? Like, what is the process? And this is the idea then of the process and the diagrams. Like,
and they also claim, though, that there is a certain, I don't know if it's right to say infinity, but there is a certain sort of proliferation of forms and meanings possible within what is already architecture. And that's their claim for the autonomy, right? That not all the reference doesn't have to dominate, but within architecture, with whatever 5,000 years of recorded history, there is enough formal data, let's say, and cultural data that we can work and rework and produce new meanings. Which is why this autonomy, since you mentioned that that's a bit of a strange word, which is why the autonomy or the autonomous project of architecture, I mean, Eisenmann loves saying this, autonomous project of architecture, it was sort of something that, like we just mentioned, some 4, 5, 6 people across time, those that did the hand drawings and those like Greg Lin that almost are responsible for the beginning of a very important movement or time in architectural design with the digital coming in. But they all sort of were, let's say, sold at least about the autonomous project somehow.
Yeah,
right.
Is a tricky word because like in the article that you guys mentioned, in my blog, I try to simplify a lot just to get the narrative a bit more clear, because then you can see how the steps a bit clear. Because when you introduce the word, and I rely a lot more on the sort of like the philosophy story and the steps of like from Foucault to Deleuze to so it's easy to kind of place things historically, but the project of autonomy is it's a bit funny. I mean, it took me a while to understand what they were talking about. It's like, what is it like?
I'm still working on it.
We all are.
But no, it is connected then to what we were just saying, from like the difference between OMA and these other guys that are more diagrammatic, Eisenmann and UN Studio, FOA, these other guys. One is not revealing the sources or the intentions, while these others are explicitly trying to reveal those intentions, like where the project comes from, even the concept, like this eureka moment where we have an idea, this is the concept. They say, well, no, it came from these exact steps that we took, and this is where the building comes from, and that's very important to have this idea of a project that is that clear, that is that accessible to everybody, like everybody can understand where it comes from. a consequence of doing that, of being that clear and open about project, is that your project is sort of, it comes, it's the final product sort of comes by itself. Like, it's a consequence of all this information that you collected, and then suddenly you have this shape, as in a final shape. So in that sense, I would say, like, there is an autonomy. It's autonomous. It's its own thing.
Okay.
Because there was no architect from the outside saying, I want it to be like this, sort of a la Getty style, where he has a vision and then he shapes that vision. In this case, the final product, the final building, is just going to be it's its own thing. So in that sense, it's autonomous. So the whole autonomy, I would say, simplifying it, it's a consequence of making sure that your project is that open and that sort of procedural, where you can follow the steps of every decision, kind of thing.
I've always thought, I think I just wanted to first add that I think this is also Koolhaas's, I think, popularly known history as wanting to be a journalist first in life, like making documentary movies and things like that. And then somehow this eureka or romantic moment of him discovering Moscow, and before the wall fell, he discovers some Soviet works, and then he comes back to Europe wanting to be an architect while being on a journalistic project. And I think it also explains a little bit of his not showing his sources and references. But within this autonomous project, there's also this question that still bothers me, and it's not very clear in my head, that there is this point at which the building, like you say, is just there. It's a kind of a result of its consequences, and the sources are all, let's say, shown. The references are all laid out there. Even the concept is carefully constructed, and the construction is shown. But there's always, and I think Eisenmann has never claimed otherwise. So I think not that I know of, at least. But I think there's always this economy, almost. This is my term. I'm saying economy of the parts. That I mean, if he puts two types of grids on top of each other to overlap to produce a kind of multiple sort of what he calls interstitialities between grids that are at two very different scales. And the idea of subdivision is being sort of exposed, of how subdivision works through grids and stuff. He must be putting them on two tracing papers and somehow sensing a point where he must stop sliding them over each other, if I were to go that literally. But once you look at the actual diagram, there's always an idea that he produced each part of the building separately as an interaction between multiple parts. And there was always this aesthetic, sort of sensual aspect of, this is just about right, but not in the way that we understand Gehry to be doing, Frank Gehry to be doing.
Yeah.
But there is this part of his work that is personally the most interesting for me, of how he produces these little fragments of objects and then goes on to apply them to what is a virtual sort of abstract idea of a building, and whatever program it might need, or whatever function and use and all of that being important it might need.
Yes, that's true. For example, UN Studio, Plasma Studio, which was like a second generation after the Greg Lean and FOA and UN Studio generation. They were quite interested in the aesthetics of a building. So I remember in school I was following all of them and about the process, and the process is what matters, and how the building looks at the end, it's whatever, because what really matters is that it came out of all this information, and the building is what it has to be. Like it looks what it is to be. And then I remember I come to Plasma in my internship, and I produce a concept, and then I gather all this information and diagrams, and then I take like 1 hour to explain where my shape came from with all these like steps and blah, blah, blah. And then Eva just said, "Do you like it?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Do you like it or not?" And then I'm like, I was puzzled. I was like, "But isn't it all about the diagrams? Like, why does it matter if it's ugly or not?" And then it was quite clear, like, we as designers also have this role of creating beautiful things. And then the mastering of the tools, it's very important, because if you master the tools, then you can master the final look of a building. Yes, you are using all this data, you are using all this information, you are revealing all your sources. But because you master the tools, either a 2D paper tracing grid or a programming Grasshopper thingy, you will produce, or you should produce beautiful stuff. Like you can say, "I like it," which, funnily enough, I mean, trying to create connections to OMA, lately they said, "Well, we cannot do parametrics. We cannot do this crazy good looking stuff. So now we're going to do ugly, modern looking stuff." And that's what they've been doing lately, like for the last 10 years, like ugly stuff, like on purpose.
It just
I
goes
love
in.
it. I love how you got there. That was a surprise.
But
but I do agree with you.
Yeah, but
about OMA.
then do you think like the diagram still keeps holding its kind of ground, or do you think it is distilled out from existing situations? Okay.
Yes. So this is like really cool stuff. I like 2 or 3 months ago, I started listening to the Santa Fe Institute podcast.
Cool.
Okay.
They were these guys that were creating all this like complexity and dynamics and blah 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 studies that all these architects in the 90s were using. The diagrammatic architects, Ben Barbeckel and all of them, Ilya Prigogine, and all of these like complexity shapes and fractals and things out of all about like complex systems.
I have to look this up.
Yeah, even me.
I've completely missed this, or I will see an image and then I will probably know better.
Yeah. No. So the whole idea of like chaos theory and all this like studying complex systems and dynamical systems,
cellular automata and things.
All of this stuff. Like
I think at some point Mark Wigley was also.
So a lot of this came out of this Santa Fe Institute in the United States.
Okay.
Now, what happens right now is that because of the explosion of data, suddenly all this matters again. Because these guys, the Santa Fe Institute, they were the ones doing this whole agent-based modeling back in the day. Like we're talking about 90s or maybe even 80s.
Yeah.
They designed the models and they could do some agent-based modeling simulations. But the data was so little that whatever they simulate was not that important at the end.
Yeah.
But now, because we have all these available data and all these like algorithms and blah, 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 suddenly these guys are agent-based modeling is like amazing, because now we can get new insights of all this stuff. So that is to say that's been the idea. Like the idea of the diagram is to bring information, and you can sort of simulate and run different options, and the parametrics is also the idea that you bring information, different inputs, and then your building starts sort of acquiring some sort of shape, some sort of state where things are working in a better way, more efficient way, etc., etc. So there is a revival, so to say, now because
Okay.
of data. The diagram is the key to be able to master this, which is a problem that is. Sorry, I'm jumping into a different topic now, but
Go ahead.
It is a problem that we have now, because nowadays everybody can do Grasshopper. All the companies can do daylight analysis in Grasshopper. Everybody's doing the desks arranging by themselves in an office plan. But what is lacking is this diagram that connects everything. It's as if everybody learned about the tools, but everybody forgot where these tools came from.
Or what they were hoping to achieve with these tools.
Otherwise, then you just like apply one daylight analysis, fine. Then you apply this other one, and it's like there's no connection, no intention of.
You should slide the louvers on the facade and figure out which is the best position at 3 p.m. and done.
Yeah, but the whole project that came from like Eisenmann and then these other guys of revealing your design process is kind of lost. Because they jumped.
But do you think like the diagram is or was in a way in the Eisenmann, and I might be completely I'm trying to connect these two situations. Like you said, there's a revival of the diagram now. So do you think that during the Eisenmann early 90s Ben van Berkel time it was a pre-thing, and now because of the explosion of the data, the key difference is that the diagram is now post idea. Like the diagram has to be made afterwards, after a sort of very
because
choice based.
Like, do you mean that the diagram was being discussed in different terms back then?
Yes.
Or was it still being discussed in these terms with the Santa Fe stuff?
Yeah.
Because I'm asking to figure out, does it have an impact on sort of maybe on an ontological level or a philosophical level in terms of the production of meaning through architecture?
Yeah.
This shift, even if we were to call it the same diagram, because back then I remember the terminology or the phrase that was common was, at least in an essay by, let's say, Anthony Widler, it would say that it's in a state of becoming always, the diagram, that it does record and represent not essences, but qualities of that must manifest in a piece of architecture, but it is in a state of becoming. It's not a prescribed sort of formula. That's why we call it a diagram. And now, even with this shift towards, let's say, agent-based modeling of spaces or of behaviors or of any other aspect for that matter, it still has a connection to, of course, being in a state of becoming in a different way. But how does the question of producing different or new meanings, either philosophically or sort of specifically ontologically, still work, especially for you in your understanding and how you see the diagram? Does it still work for you through this sort of post-digital or whatever you want to call it time where all that data has now become available? And now because it's a little bit, I don't know if I'm jumping or I'm going to confuse you, but it's a little bit also going to that thing that you mentioned about a place in Sweden where they would say, oh, don't tell us it's a hill or a bird or a wave, give us the cost. But then that also, doesn't it feel a little bit, of course, I don't want to make a building that looks like a bird, but I'm saying, doesn't it feel like the meaning is being put in the background? An architectural meaning is being put in the background by the masses, by the people who want to see how much of our city taxes will be paid.
Yeah.
And if the cost is too high, it's not worth it. So how does meaning come into play for you now with the diagram?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a very long question. I didn't think I would take that off.
No, this is good stuff. So I would say in a particular case here, our local case, So yeah, we ended up in this like, okay, don't give me the these funny
Reference.
explanations of
Right.
like
Yeah.
iconic and analogies. Just tell me how much it costs. But the truth is,
Yeah.
the discussion, like the mayor here in the city, when he made the official announcement that this project is not going anymore, like this one of this castle, he specifically say the discussion was very low.
The
As in
discussion was
very low, very superficial.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
this is the mayor criticizing the people. Interesting.
Yes, like saying, yeah, okay, your voice, I'm hearing what you say. We cancel the
Yeah.
project, fine, because that's what you asked for. But
Yeah.
I considered that the discussion was not at a good level. Like these were
Okay.
really
Interesting.
silly arguments. I would say precisely because we architects now just show like a quick idea
Yeah.
with costs, and there is no narrative. There is no
Okay.
time to produce a proper narrative for a project. There was no time to link our proposal, even though it was a feasibility study, but there was no time to study a bit of history, of create some cultural references or linkages to what we were proposing. Then the problem is people take the images literally. Like what we show, even though it was very sort of meant to be abstract and just a feasibility, it's not even the project. Later there would be a competition for the actual thing. People just see the image and they think, oh, that's the final result.
Yeah.
Even though we work on it for 2 weeks, they think, oh, that's horrible. Like we don't want that. But you are interested in the numbers. So now why are you asking me about like if it looks ugly or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always this confusion.
Yeah, it's as if we do want to feel connected to the proposals at a deep level.
Yeah.
And the image should reflect that. But because there is no time, then we cannot produce that. So there's this divide, this sort of clashing right now. And yes, I think in that sense, the diagram will help, because the diagram allows you to create this build-up. You can also include cultural information as part of the build-up of a project using a diagrammatic way. So you are revealing, you're showing all the references. There is no ideas coming out of nowhere that you cannot explain. Like everything has been laid on the table. On top of that, there is going to be cultural references, and then people feel an attachment, a linkage to the result, and the discussion can be different. But so in that sense, it's still relevant. Like the diagram definitely is the thing that we should use. It's important to say that the diagram, like in this case, I would argue that 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History of Manuel de Landa is a book that we should all read.
Yeah.
Because in that one, then you understand that the diagram is not the diagram. That, for example, he explains that there is 3 different diagrams. The one that defines the geological, the ones that defines the biological, and the ones that defines the cultural. But the 3 of them sort of run parallel. So you can see the one of the geological, it will be helpful to explain, for example, things in society still, like the hierarchical systems can be explained using the geological diagram. And then these 3 stages, actually, it was Gilles Deleuze who proposed those 3 stages, but Manuel de Landa explains them very, very well. So the diagram is not just like one, there is different versions, different kinds of diagrams. And I'm saying this because this is also then what the complexity studies, dynamical systems, the Santa Fe Institute is trying to do. Like they've been studying all these complex systems, and then they say, yes, there's some things that look chaotic, but when you go inside and study them as a system, you realize that there is a sort of logic behind them.
Right.
And they are the ones who came up with these words of like attractors and like field of possibilities and the state spaces.
It also reminds me of the Stan Allen field project.
You're talking about this. He talks about the fields. Yeah, I know. I cannot remember the essay, but sorry.
So what they're just saying is like there is things that are static.
Yeah.
But there is also things that have movement and are always moving. Seem random, but they always have a pattern. But basically what they were saying is like there is a diagram in the background. Even it does crazy, there is always some sort of structure underneath it, which means it's a diagram. So there is diagrams for different sort of kind of situation. In this case, Manuel de Landa talks about 3 of them. And this is important because this whole idea of the dynamical systems is what helps us understand that things are not black and white, but there is always a range. Like what you were saying, like things, the becoming, it's sort of there, but sometimes leans to this side, sometimes leans to that side, and then sort of comes back again to this point. So that's important.